Hi, this is Emily Midgett from 6th Street Sundries, here today with a guest post for Ellen Hutson's Watercolor Week. I love watercoloring, and Ellen Hutson carries such a wonderful line of Daniel Smith watercolor paints that I just had to use them for my guest post. I've created a holiday card for today's video, but all of the techniques demonstrated can easily be applied to all flowers. For my project, I'm using the Exploring Watercolor Kit from Ellen Hutson. This kit has some great basics to help you get started on your watercolor journey. Included are the Daniel Smith Watercolor Essentials Tube Watercolor Set, 3 black velvet brushes, a flat wash brush, a round number 8 and a round number 12 brush, and a pad of Arches cold press watercolor paper, which works beautifully with the Daniel Smith line. I also am using Ellen Hutson's Christmas Words dies, Mondo Poinsettia and Poinsettia and Pine dies, as well as the new plaid stamp from Concord and Ninth. To start, I cut a panel of the Arches cold press watercolor paper, then die cut and heat embossed the poinsettias and foliage from the Mondo Poinsettia set using gold sparkle embossing powder. After heat embossing, I taped the die cuts to my cutting board. I like to tape my images to a board for a few reasons, the first of which is to give me the option of having my image tilted at an angle, followed closely by limiting the warping caused by adding water to the paper. Next, I added paints to my watercolor palette. I added just a dab of each color included in the Essentials kit, and just that tiny dab was more than enough for my project today. These small tubes are very cost efficient and give you a great deal of use before you even have to think about replacing them. The Essentials set covers all of your basic primary colors and includes a few shades of each to give you plenty of options for warm or cool undertones. I also would recommend a few individual colors in addition to the Essentials kit. Today, I've added the neutral tint to my palette to help add shadows to my project. To start, I simply do a light wash of the quinacridone rose on each petal using the number 8 brush included in the Essentials kit. I add a dab of fairly concentrated color towards the center of each petal, then clean the brush and use the tip of the cleaned brush to pull the color out. You will notice that I'm turning my cutting board frequently and that I have it propped up at an angle. This is to allow gravity to help me pull the color out in a more natural, organic way. I'm using the number 8 brush for this initial layer of color because I'm not terribly concerned with adding a great amount of detail, but I do recommend getting a smaller brush for detail work. The number 8 holds a great deal of water, so it is very useful for achieving those watercolor blooms. Watercolor for me is all about layers. Adding multiple layers of color is my best tip for getting great depth and shading in your watercolored projects. Don't be afraid to go back in and manipulate the color with your clean, damp paintbrush. For this second layer, I've added a touch of the neutral tint to my quinacridone rose to add some shadows. I'm not adding nearly as much color to my petals as I only want some of the petals to have shadows. I take care to notice which petals would be behind another petal because those would be a bit more shadowed. I'm using the same technique, adding bits of concentrated color towards the center, then cleaning my brush and using the tip of my damp paintbrush to pull that color out and blend it smoothly. For this third layer, I added just a touch more of the neutral tint to my quinacridone rose mixture. I added shadows along the veins of each petal using just a tiny amount of this dark color, then pulled them out with my clean, damp paintbrush. These 3 layers of shading together really make those petals pop off the page. For the poinsettia centers, I used new gamboge alone for the first layer, then mixed some more neutral tint to the new gamboge on my palette to add to the stamens in the background and create a shadowed look. The lighter colors are almost always in the foreground, while the darker, duller colors are in the background. For the leaves, I had to create a custom shade of green since green is a secondary color, and the Essentials set contains primary colors. Remember your color wheel training from grade school? I decided to swatch a couple of different shades on a scrap of watercolor paper. For the first swatch and the color that I ended up using, I mixed French ultramarine and new gamboge to create an olive green. The phthalo blue and Hansa yellow light combination created more of a turquoise, so I decided to save that color combination for a future project. I added color to the edge of the leaves and the center of the veins, then pulled the color out with my clean, damp paintbrush. After it had dried for a moment, I added a second layer of color using the same process. To create my card, I started by die cutting some spruce sprigs 3 times using the Hutson Poinsettia and Pine standalone die set from some dark olive green cardstock. For the background of my card base, I used Concord & Ninth's new plaid background stamp and Altenews purple wine ink, which is almost a perfect match for the watercolored poinsettias. I taped my card base down to the base of my MISTI to ensure that I would be able to stamp the plaid multiple times and get perfect coverage. Taping the card base down ensures that the stamp will go back to the exact same spot. Because the pink of the plaid background and the pink of the poinsettias is so similar, I decided to soften the plaid pattern with some vellum to really help those poinsettias to pop. Vellum can be tricky to adhere neatly, but I like to use die cuts to hide my adhesive. To do this, I mounted the vellum panel on my card base with some washi tape because it's easily removable. Then arranged my holiday bouquet and picked it up with the press and seal. I added adhesive to the back of my bouquet while the press and seal was still stuck to the bouquet, then adhered it to the vellum. Once the bouquet was adhered to the vellum, I removed my vellum panel from the card base and discarded the washi tape. I then added my permanent adhesive to the vellum behind the bouquet. I added it to my card base and trimmed the foliage that was hanging off of the edges to ensure that this Christmas card fits inside a standard A2 envelope. For the greeting, I used Ellen Hutson's Christmas Words dies cut from charcoal cardstock. To add some texture, I covered the sentiment die cuts with some Nouveau crystal glaze to really make them shine. I hope you've enjoyed this video and have maybe learned a few tips and tricks on how to make your watercoloring a little bit easier. If you liked this video, I have several other watercoloring videos on my YouTube channel, as well as numerous watercolored projects on my blog at emilymidgett.com. Thanks so much for watching!